Hey everybody, welcome to the Therapist Take podcast. We're going to talk about the relational purpose of difficult emotions, so don't go anywhere. Hi Carrie.
Hi, Josh.
We're going to talk about the role of difficult emotions. This is a conversation that you and I have had a lot of times,
Many
so I
times.
just don't think we've ever talked about maybe all four of these difficult feelings, and there's a lot more, but I don't think we've ever talked
Right.
about them in all at once before, so we'll see how this conversation goes.
Okay.
So before we begin, let me just kind of go over with everybody the breakdown of this episode. And so you can see on your screen that we're going to go over these different difficult emotions. I don't know exactly what order we're going to address them in, whatever it's showing you on your screen, we might go in a different order, but we're going to talk about anger versus rage, shame versus guilt. Then we're going to talk about resentment versus contempt. That's one of my favorites. And then defeat versus being destroyed. But before we dive into that, just want to remind everybody that's watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, ring the bell so you can be notified when more videos are posted. And then if you're listening to this on our podcast, please just for a second stop what you're doing, give us a 5-star review, and then come right back to us and dive into this episode. And don't forget to check the show notes out or the description of the video because I've put some different book links that kind of have to do with what we're talking about today with these different feelings, and they'll probably come up during our conversation, as well as like therapist directories and other types of resources there. So check those out. Okay. So before we get started, let's just talk about a little bit why is this important to understand. I believe that all our emotions have a purpose.
Okay.
I don't think all of them are exactly helpful relationally, but I do think the ones we're going to talk about today are.
Okay.
But I do think they have a maladaptive purpose, a maladaptive counterpart to them that, in the right context, those what we might consider a maladaptive feeling, like rage, for example, in the right context, would be very functional, right? But just not in a relational context.
Right.
Do you try to help your couples understand these feelings in that way?
The function of them?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you and I both practice
Right.
similarly when it comes to that, right? That it's about kind of let's have a relationship with your emotions, right? And
Yeah, it's kinda weird,
understanding well, of course, everything's a system, right?
right.
Systems of systems. And so the idea, what does it look like for you to become friends with some of these emotions, right? And when is that friend sometimes going to go off the deep end,
Right.
and anger becomes that higher end rage, right? It's something people are going to experience. I don't necessarily think it's helpful.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, contextually,
In a relationship, I should say helpful in a relationship.
yes, I would agree with that. Yeah, I'm the same way. I find it really important to help couples understand their relationship with these feelings, and certain feelings generate their feelings about feelings.
Feelings
right?
about feelings, you bet.
And so, and we got to dive into that. But as a therapist, I'm always thinking about this in session. It helps me try to understand what's happening to the person,
Right.
what's happening to the couple. If I can try to understand if I can experience what emotion they're feeling, and then try to connect the dots on why they possibly might be feeling that, because their brain is actually trying to help them.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if we can establish that, then maybe they can learn to manage the feelings better, and therefore prevent them from kind of going to the extreme versions of themselves, basically.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think this work is challenging, right? Because it does require this almost meta level of reflecting upon reflecting, right? The emotions of your emotions. And
Right.
but I think it's such a cool way to look at it. Right?
You remember learning about that in grad school? We talk about meta communication, communicating about communicating, but when we start talking about meta emotion, like your emotions about your emotions, that was like, oh, like that's.
Whoa.
I felt like I needed like a psychedelic to. That was a trip.
That was a
Like,
trip.
what?
Yeah.
Like-
I felt seen when it was there. I was like, oh
Yeah,
Okay.
there is that sense of like something connected. Like
Yeah.
the world made a little
yeah.
bit more sense.
But that's why I feel like the reason we do what we do, because all that stuff was speaking right to us.
Right, sure. Yeah, we nerd out about
Nerd
that.
out, yeah.
Yeah, the whole idea of, we have certain feelings about certain feelings. So for example, a lot of people that are angry, or a lot of people that are learning to let their anger show up, one of the reasons why I think they don't is because anger and shame are so closely connected with each other. So I have a hard time getting angry without feeling shame at the same time. Why that happens, it can be so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming up with popping theories all around when you say that, right?
Like what?
That society tells you it's
That's one of
bad
them.
to be, don't be an angry woman. Oh my
Oh yeah,
gosh,
yes.
right? Oof.
That's also like a trope for, I think, for black women too, like like angry black woman, and there's also like religious influence, like don't let the sun go down on your anger
Right.
is
Never go to bed angry. I
never
hate that advice as a
right.
couples therapist.
Well, let me say this. Just I know this is not a religious podcast, but that does come from the Bible, where it says, I can't remember who said it. It's probably Paul or Peter one. It said like don't let the sun go down on your anger. Like when I talk to people about that, because we living in the Bible Belt, that comes up sometimes in couples, and especially like older couples, really try to adhere to that. But when you follow that literally, like you're actually creating the thing that scripture is actually trying to prevent. So basically what that is saying is handle your crap, is what it's saying. Like, take care of business, so in other words, don't stuff your feelings and let them carry on. Handle it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be handled before the sun goes down.
Right.
But because people have taken that so literally, what do they end up doing? So I stuff my feelings. So I create the problem it's trying to prevent. So
Wow.
anyways, little soapbox there
Okay, I like it.
on that one.
I guess we should start with anger versus rage, and we kind of have hung there a little bit. haven't
Yeah,
we?
since we started, I think we
Yeah,
have started.
I think we have. Yeah.
You're really the one that kind of turned me onto the idea of feelings serving, a functional purpose. The uncomfortable ones, the difficult ones, all having a meaning. And you said the thing that really stuck with me is when you said anger lets us know someone has trespassed, right? So that's the functional, relational purpose of anger. Anger. So like if a couple comes in your office and they're like, we don't ever get mad at each other. Like, what's your first kind of reaction to that?
Uh-oh.
Well, let me get started.
Right here, I'll work that for you.
Yeah.
No.
Ooh.
Yeah. No, it just doesn't. That doesn't feel authentic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. My first thought is like, well, either they haven't been together long enough,
Right.
or they're
Right.
just
Stuff,
lying
stuff,
to
stuff.
themselves,
Right.
basically stuff and things. Yeah. And we talked about this. I think the episode we did on the compassionate response continuum, where we talk about like that once that trespass has happened, you should feel some level of anger, because now the focus of
Right.
the conversation or whatever you're dealing with needs to shift from you to me.
Yeah. But that is harder for people to do.
Oh yeah, I mean it's hard for me to do.
Yeah.
I mean I don't lean toward anger. Do you lean toward anger?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're more comfortable with it. I'm less comfortable with it. Okay, so let's talk about shame, because we're talking about how sometimes people feel shame when they're angry. I think of Brene Brown when I see this.
I know.
Yeah, which we have a link to her book. Anything Brene Brown that you can get your hands on, I'd recommend reading it. But she's a shame researcher, and she's really the first one that I've heard that really that made a good distinction between guilt versus shame.
Sure. Yeah. So how do you say what she said, or do you just
Well,
quote
how
her
I remember
directly?
her saying it is guilt is saying, I'm sorry I made a mistake. And shame is saying, I'm sorry I am a mistake.
Right. That's the internalized is shame,
Right.
and the guilt is the action, the external. Right.
Yeah, and I think she would even say like that they still really don't have a good theory on the evolutionary purpose of shame. Like still don't really quite understand like why, how that helped anybody. I actually have some theory on that, but I'd probably be laughed out of the room.
I think I saw some book that was looking at the evolution of I need to read it. I'm not going to say anything until we'll link it next time. I need
Do
to
you
read
want
it. I
to hear
got
mine?
so many
I'll say
books.
mine.
Okay.
A shame. So again, shame is that feeling of feeling like you are a mistake, like versus I made a mistake. So as Brene Brown talks about, it's guilt is outward and shame is inward. So that makes sense. Like people who deal with shame, they feel like at their core they're defective. So they go in with it because I don't want you to figure out that I'm defective, or you won't want to be around me, or you won't invite me into your group, or you won't want to be in a relationship with me. So I hide my shame because
To
because I
preserve.
can't change who I am, and at my core I'm defective. But guilt is not. Guilt is saying I'm not defective. I'm a good person. I'm okay, but I did something that I need to be sorry for or apologize for or make amends. And guilt is there. The relational function, from in my opinion, is
Yeah.
to let you know that you are in violation of your a moral belief, a
Value statement. Yeah.
values, principles,
Yep. Yep.
or some kind of agreement that you've had, integrity. And it's just letting you know that you need to get back on track,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, I think it's very
Yeah.
much a modulator,
Yeah,
right? Oh boy, if I do that, I will feel bad.
right. Absolutely. So where shame is like it's not the thing I did, it's just who I am.
I am bad, right?
Right. So the evolutionary purpose. This is my theory, and
Okay.
I'm like I said, I might get laughed out of the room if I were ever presenting this in front of real scientists. But I like to think of things in terms of survival, like
Yeah.
going back to like we were just talking about rage, for example. I think rage has a very valuable purpose when it comes to survival. Like I mean, I feel like if any type of bear I've seen in the movies, it looks like that bear is raging. And that probably keeps them alive a lot of times because it's very
Probably, yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
You know, but shame, but why? What would evolution's purpose be for making us feel bad about ourselves, making us feel defective? And my thought has to do with when it comes to survival is if I'm defective, then I likely have a target on my back. I need to watch my back. And so an effective way to help you survive is to create some idea that says that you need to watch your back. You need to be hyper vigilant. And a good way of doing that is thinking that people are out to get me, or a number of other
Yeah.
types of thoughts. Like I'm just not a good person, and so I'm just, if that's the case, then God, karma, the gods, or
Universe, yeah.
the universe is going to strike me down at some point. So I'm constantly paying attention. That's my theory,
That's
but I don't
interesting.
know.
Yeah, because it's hard. Then you start thinking about it. Because I think guilt has got an adaptive function in that. Ooh, if I do that, I'll have negative consequences. Let me slow down and learn from others, or stop a behavior, or repair something that I've broken. That has a real evolutionary. You can see benefit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Create social structures, etc. Just trying to think about how shame would fit. Maybe it is about you just survive, right?
That's what I'm wondering. I
Yeah,
mean, if it
interesting.
goes back to the basic, but it could be, I think it's kind of been correlated to like the appendix, that it probably served to some purpose long ago, but nobody knows what it is anymore.
Well,
Type
what we
thing.
do
So,
know is that we do know now that it's not functional to operate from shame, right? It's a
oh,
sticky
I
space.
thought you were talking about the appendix.
Oh.
I mean,
The
yeah,
appendix?
yeah, the appendix, yeah. But you're talking about shame. So we're back on shame.
Well, yeah. I
Okay,
shifted
yeah.
back to the topic here.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, right, Josh? I mean, you
Yeah.
spend pretty much all day,
Yeah,
right, helping people manage toxic shame, right?
right. It virtually has no function today. I mean, at least I can't think of one.
Yeah.
At least a viable function.
You're trying to help people repair and recover from that.
I mean, that's what we spend a good part of our time doing. I mean, shame is involved in everything, which is also reflected in Brene Brown's research. Is that
Yeah.
it's in every maladaptive behavior and every what word am I looking for? Like just I don't like using the word dysfunction, but you know,
Unhelpful.
yeah, like anything that's that's considered unhelpful or unhealthy when it comes to human behavior and relationships, shame is in there somewhere usually, and I don't know if we're ever completely free of it.
I don't know.
So, okay, let's. This is fun to talk about
Okay.
resentment versus contempt because I think a lot of people might be surprised to hear like how is resentment functional?
Yeah.
Like it just seems like it's such a awful feeling,
Well, and
right?
I mean, think about all the 12-step communities, right? And the step work, step 4, right? List out your resentments and own your
Yeah, it's
resentments,
true,
right? It's about an attempt to say, well, you don't need to be walking around with resentment in your life,
right?
right?
But it's also too like the way you said that just now made me think like that maybe there's like an expectation that everybody has them. So like just say them.
I
Like
think that
they're
is
not
true.
saying do you have them? They're
Right.
saying list them
Let's
out.
let's talk about him, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's just part of the human condition, I think.
Sure, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, categories and scorekeeping,
Hmm.
right? So innate.
Yeah, it's fun. I need to check with my wife, see who's winning.
I
Yeah.
bet I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Stop. It's me. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know.
In my mind.
Sure.
Um, but what, like, well, from your view, like, how do you, I mean, what's the point of resentment for a couple? Like, how does that help them?
Well, I don't think it's super helpful. So let's just go ahead and say it that way,
Hmm.
right? I do think that I think resentment still can be dangerous. I think contempt is obviously, we're going to talk about that,
Right.
dangerous. But I think that resentment is an attempt sometimes to alert you, right? In a sense, to something's off balance here,
Yes.
right? Like I gotta keep either keep my eye on something, or I need to
Hmm.
draw attention to something. Something feels unjust. Something doesn't fit, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to just overlook something that actually has
Hmm.
meaning, significance, and importance.
Yeah. I'm 100% with you, and it is complicated because um, the longer you hold
Yeah,
on to it, in my view, it starts becoming something it's not meant to be,
that's right.
which ultimately can turn into contempt, which we
Yeah,
know from
yeah.
John Gottman's book, The Seven Principles for Making a Marriage Work, I think. When he talks about his four horsemen of the apocalypse, I think contempt is like the one that's like a lot of couples can't come back from that.
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of like the death blow in a sense, right?
Yeah,
Like once you've gone there, it's really hard
yeah,
to turn.
and but I don't think it doesn't start with contempt. I think
I agree.
it probably starts with some level of frustration and then anger, and it kind of grows into like resentment. And I think when you're starting to feel the little tinge of resentment, I think what the mistake we make sometimes in our relationship is we think that something my partner is doing uh, needs to change, and they need to change that so I don't have to feel this feeling toward them. And I think that's the mistake,
Okay.
because I think resentment is telling you, it's just kind of like what you said, it's notifying you, it's alerting you to something that needs to be voiced. Like it's saying, like, hey, you're holding on to something, and if you and you're this close to holding on to it too long. So I think of it and how dehydration was explained to me
Oh,
and thirst.
okay.
Like someone, a health person, was telling me, so it wasn't me, but as we know, my issue with drinking water, like I have to constantly remind myself to drink water. I wasn't going to get a drink
I was
just
gonna say
now.
now it
I
makes
was
you
like,
want to have a
well, I better
drink,
not.
right? Yeah.
I don't want to drink into the mic. Uh, but they said like when you feel that feeling of thirst, like you're already dehydrated.
Yeah.
And that's all usually when I only drink. Whereas like my son, he carries a bottle of water around with him all the time, constantly nursing that water. Um, but I'll wait till I feel thirsty. Well, you're already dehydrated
Right.
at that point.
Right.
And that's how I kind of feel like resentment is kind of like the feeling of thirst in our relationship. And it's not, in a sense, thirsting for something as much as it's notifying you that you have let something go on too long
Right.
now.
Right.
Like
Let it go on. Yeah.
you've kept quiet too long. Now's the time to speak. And not mistake that for saying, my partner needs to change so I don't feel resentment. No, you need to speak up. That's what it's there to tell you to do. So it's very functional, in my opinion. I think a relationship will have a hard time, uh, doing, going the distance without that feeling involved
Without that feeling.
at times.
If you can learn,
Yeah,
right,
you got to pay
how to,
attention.
right. And I think that's part of the reason that you do see in a lot of those 12-step programs, you revisit your resentments.
Yeah,
It's not like, oh, I did it at 25, I'm done, right? It's being aware of it.
right.
I think good self-awareness is scanning yourself on a regular basis for what am I holding on to,
Right.
right?
So why do you think people are afraid of it then? Like, why do you think sometimes people hold on to it so long that it becomes contempt?
I think it's painful. I think they oftentimes don't believe it will change. I think oftentimes they don't believe that if they bring it up that it will get tended to.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that people get, it's easier to, this is, maybe deeper psychological perspective here, but I think if you walk around being angry and expecting it to all be bad, then it is all bad. And if you put it out there
Mm-hmm.
and it gets, you just don't know what could happen. It could get better, it could get worse. But
Yeah.
at least if I keep it in, I know exactly how this thing is going to go.
No, I think you're hitting a nail on the head. I think in a nutshell, it has to do with uncertainty. Like if I say this, then what kind of crap storm is that going to
Yeah,
potentially create?
sure.
If I say, look, I am starting to resent you because of this. I'm starting to feel resentment. Or even
Right.
if you don't even want to use that word, like, I need to let you know that it really bothers me, A, B, C, D.
Sure.
Now what? Now what do we do with that?
Right.
And so
Oh, boy.
sometimes it's just easier to take the path of least resistance and keep
Very
quiet.
often, yeah.
Right.
But again, and a lot of clients have said to me, especially around couple stuff, like, it's just we don't do well talking about it.
What does that even mean? I
Right.
always ask them that. What
Right.
does that even mean?
Well, and oftentimes, and as we do, like, well, keeping it in, we definitely know won't end
Yeah.
well either, right?
Right.
I'm not laughing to be ridiculous. It's just the way that oftentimes we go about trying to cope
Yeah.
with these negative feelings. We've flipped it the other way around.
Mhm.
It actually becomes more harmful, right? And I
Yeah.
do think untended, buried resentments are how contempt grows, because I think it's kind of an underneath thing, right? And then pretty soon you go out there and there's no fertile soil,
Right.
right? It's been contaminated.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, I don't know if you caught yourself there, but you called them negative feelings, which I usually try to change the language to difficult because that's probably how I got that name.
Sure, you're right. Yeah.
Because I mean everybody calls them that. Negative feelings because
Meaning not happy,
right.
not pleasure. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Meaning I hate that we have to have these. Now that's a negative feeling about a negative feeling.
Feeling about how you're feeling about it. Yeah.
Meta negative feelings. So, but yeah, I think that, people have to start, because they identify it as a negative feeling, that it's easier to just keep quiet. Because I don't want to be associated with being that person that's just
Yeah.
bringing up negative
Right. I
things.
don't want to bring up the past.
And that's one thing I tell people too. Is like nagging, for example. I don't want to be a nag. It's like nagging only exists when the other person isn't willing to do it. That's how you create a nag. The person who's not the nag is culpable
In the creating
in the
narrative.
creating
Yeah.
of it, because the only way you're a nag is if they're not willing to complain
Sure.
about anything or speak up about anything.
But what about contempt? Like, how do you see it?
I think contempt is born out of like long overdue resentment.
Okay.
I think resentment when you hold on to resentment, it's like a cancer that will for the relationship. And we talk about complacency being a cancer. I think resentment in its containment, as long as you're containing it and holding on to it, it will turn into contempt, which is a cancer to the relationship.
Okay.
So I mean, but that's when you're looking at your partner and you just don't see anything good about them, and it's like just a lot of negative thoughts probably are coming to mind.
Yeah.
And it is hard for couples to come back from
Sure, because your quality of thoughts is now just contaminated with negativity, right?
that. Yeah. I think sometimes the couples that I work with, they're kind of surprised to hear me speak about resentment that way because, oh, I didn't know that was okay to feel. But then they kind of like, oh, you mean that's my responsibility?
I
You
know,
know, like,
right? And it
yeah,
is.
sure, it
Sure.
is. Yeah. So let's move into this last one.
Okay.
Defeat versus being destroyed.
Mm.
I love this idea of defeat. It's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because I work with a lot of clients that when we're doing betrayal trauma work, and I'm sure you've experienced this too when you're working with the partners who have been betrayed. I often work with a person who's been unfaithful, and they just experience this defeat. Yeah. And I'm waiting for that to happen in session. Like, that's what I'm looking for because I think it's very functional. Because to me, the way I always say, I'll present to them, like, when you think of the feeling of resolve, like, how do you feel about that feeling? You know, and they're like, often will say, like, it sounds nice, like, to just, there's some kind of peace in it, and it's
Yeah.
just resolved, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
And I say, well, resolve lies just on the other side of defeat. So when you feel defeated, like maybe that means you're letting yourself get to the point to where you're willing to accept that what the thing that happened, and it's okay now to acknowledge it and to start rebuilding your life. I think resolve is I don't think it's a place where people want to live forever because there's a sadness to it,
I know. Yeah.
but there is a peace to it as well. So that's why I like the idea of defeat being a very functional feeling, especially when you're talking about a changing or transitioning relationship.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. I think if you didn't put defeat next to destroyed, people wouldn't maybe be able to see a difference. But I think
Right.
when you hear defeat and versus or compared to
Right.
or whatever destroyed, I think it starts to all of a sudden have a distinction that stands out.
Yeah.
Right? Defeated doesn't mean dead,
Right.
right? It's the lose the battle, win the war kind of idea,
Right.
right? And we see that a lot, right, on
Yeah.
this level of coupleships. Of that old relationship is destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Or defeated. Is it destroyed? That's kind of TBD,
Yeah.
right?
Well, also too the relationship. I mean, sometimes especially when we're talking about infidelity, the relationship does die. That doesn't mean the couple can't create a new one together. It just means whatever they had before, if they're going to make their togetherness work, they're going to have to create a new relationship.
Right.
So in a sense, that relationship did get destroyed, but that doesn't the relationship getting destroyed versus the individuals that make up the relationship getting destroyed are two different things.
Sure. So on the individual level, then what is destroyed look like?
The way I see it is I don't know if you can understand it without relationship, like I think it has to have that in the backdrop.
Okay.
So I often talk to couples about it in the sense of need versus want. Like a need-based relationship versus a want-based relationship, which I think you would probably agree with me that we want couples to. A lot of people will start out in need-based relationships and then transition, and they got to transition into a want-based relationship, which is basically codependency versus interdependency, right?
Right.
And so the way I help couples understand it, because there is this idea that, well, I need to not need my partner anymore, and that's true, but then it's just like no vulnerability at all.
Yeah.
So I came up with this expression to help them understand that vulnerability has to be involved to some degree. So the way I say it is that when you truly want your partner, you position yourself for a broken heart. But when you desperately need your partner, you position yourself for a broken life. And that is way too much power to give any one individual. So that's how I kind of conceptualize it, is that
That's good.
I have enough vulnerability in the relationship that you can break my heart, but you can't break me. That's the difference in defeat versus destroyed, in my opinion.
But I think it's actually inviting vulnerability in, right? You can break my heart. I'm not saying I'm going to have no skin in the game,
Right.
right?
Yeah, the relationship won't work if you're not vulnerable.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why it's not. defeat versus whatever positive ooey gooey feelings on the other side of that. It's defeat is good. Like it's
Yeah.
you
We
know
talk about that, right? We
good.
got to learn to lose.
Yes, we do that with kids all the
I
time in
mean, we want our
sports.
kids to be, what do they say? Oh, put them in, they need to be in a place, so, quite often where they're just a little bit not capable,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So whether that's a sports or a extracurricular or academic
Mm-hmm.
or a social thing, right? So they can
Right.
learn,
Right.
right?
We don't want them to lose, but they need to lose.
Sure.
One thing I would tell our little softball team that we had for a couple of years, I'd say like we win like winners and we lose like winners. That was a really important principle for
Sure.
me to teach them is that
Mm-hmm.
we don't we it's okay to be sad about it. It's okay to be upset about
Yeah.
it, but you will go and you will accept your loss and your defeat, and you will
Mm-hmm.
tell the other team good game.
Sure.
You
And in
know,
a good space, that defeat teaches you determination and
sure.
focus,
Like,
right?
I don't like this feeling.
I'm not. My son said that after a tough
Yeah.
sports experience this year. He said, "I don't ever want to
Mm-hmm.
have that feeling again, Mom." I'm like, "Well, then that experience did exactly what it's supposed to do. I didn't have to say a thing, right?" Kind of on another level, what we've been talking about today, start to be curious about your inner world and be, wondering how do I feel about my feelings. It creates a rich space when you do face defeat and struggle that you can go, oh, I don't want to feel that again, or ooh, that person was better than me at that, or ooh, that was an unsafe, position for me, and you start to become someone who figures it out and keeps on
Mm-hmm.
going, and not in a just I'm going to be rote and behavioral with it, but it creates this rich inner world, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of learning to write your own hero's journey,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is what,
Mm-hmm.
if you really think about it, learning about your emotions is about, right?
Right. Yeah. 100%. I agree.
Yeah.
So, well, it's fun talking about it with
Yeah, it
you,
is fun. We like this stuff.
picking things apart like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that people listening to this found some kind of benefit in that
Me
you're
too.
able to connect and relate. And if anything, if there's one takeaway, I would say is that your feelings are trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you perceive them as to be hurting you, then you probably are going to stuff them away or try to push them down.
Yeah.
And so uh, I hope that people can see that, at least theoretically, how feelings might be trying to serve a viable purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you back next time.